The cabin door shattered inward with a deafening crack, sending shards of wood flying across the room. I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat curled up in the dark, my back pressed against the cold wooden panels of the wardrobe, gripping the hunting knife so tightly my knuckles ached. My breath came shallow and slow, my heart hammering against my ribs. Something was in the room. I heard the floorboards groan beneath its weight, heavy, deliberate steps moving closer. A slow, dragging inhale filled the air, thick and wet, like something sniffing for prey. The walls of the cabin felt smaller, suffocating, as if they were folding in around me. I didn't dare look. But some part of me, the part that had always been too curious for its own good, needed to see. Slowly, carefully, I shifted just enough to peer through the slats of the wardrobe door. What I saw made my stomach lurch. Towering over the wreckage of my bed, bent under the low wooden beams, was something that should not exist. It stood at least 8 feet tall, a grotesque amalgamation of twisted limbs and mismatched features. Its body was covered in patches of thick, matted fur, but its chest was bare, pale, stretched skin taut over an unnaturally wide ribcage. Its arms were long, the fingers unnervingly human, except for the doubled knuckles that cracked as it flexed its hands. Its face was the worst. The antlers curling from its skull were uneven, one twisted and broken at an unnatural angle. Its mouth stretched too wide, filled with jagged teeth that didn't seem to fit together. And where its eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just hollow, sunken sockets of dark, empty skin. It couldn't see me, but it knew I was there. I held my breath as it took another step, its head tilting in slow, unnatural jerks. It sniffed the air, turning its massive frame toward the wardrobe. I clenched my knife tighter, every muscle in my body screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything but sit there. But I knew if I moved, if I so much as breathed wrong, it would hear me. And then it lunged. With a guttural roar, it slammed its fists against the walls, tearing through the room in a blind rage. The bed splintered, the dresser toppled over. The entire cabin trembled under all its fury. My body shook, every nerve alight with terror. Then its hands landed on the wardrobe. Before I could react, before I could even think, it shoved the heavy wooden structure over. I crashed to the ground, tangled in fabric and broken wood, my knife slipping from my grip. I barely had time to scramble backward before the creature loomed over me, its breath hot and rancid against my skin. For a single agonizing moment, I thought this was it. Then just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. It let out a guttural, frustrated sound, then turned and disappeared through the broken door, vanishing into the dark forest beyond. I lay there staring at the ceiling, shaking so hard I thought my bones might break. Somehow I had survived. But I knew deep down it wasn't over. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't finished with me. And I was trapped in these mountains with no way out. I had come here to escape. I thought a month in a secluded cabin, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, would be the perfect way to clear my head. After 5 years, my marriage had fallen apart. She had left so quickly that by the time I came home from work that day, half the house was empty. A month later, I lost my job. I was broke, alone, and angry at the world. So I ran. Found a listing for an off-grid cabin. No service, no electricity, no distractions. The description was vague, the pictures blurry, but I didn't care. I just wanted silence. When I called to book it, the owner was oddly insistent that I couldn't drive there myself. Said the roads were too easy to lose, that GPS wouldn't work that deep in the mountains. Instead, he arranged for a guide to take me. I met him at a rundown general store an hour outside the nearest town. Jake Morrison was the kind of man who looked like he'd been born in the woods and never left. Tall, lean, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. "You the renter?" he asked, his voice rough. "That obvious?" I tossed my backpack onto the trailer hitched to the back of his ATV. He grunted and climbed into the driver's seat. "Get in." The ride was brutal. The trail barely qualified as a path, bouncing us over rocks and weaving through dense trees. An hour later, we reached a clearing where the road simply stopped. "This is where we walk," Jake said, already unloading my gear. "How far?" "Few miles." I adjusted my bag and followed him into the trees. At first, I was too focused on keeping up to notice the silence. Then, about halfway through the hike, it hit me. I expected to hear birds, bugs, maybe a distant stream. but there was nothing. Just the sound of our boots on the dirt. Jake hadn't spoken in a while either. When the cabin finally came into view, I exhaled. It was small, sturdy, exactly what I had wanted. Jake set my gear on the porch, adjusted his cap, and finally spoke again. "You'll be fine," he said, "long as you don't wander too far." Then without another word, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I watched him go, feeling the weight of true isolation settle in. I thought I wanted silence. I had no idea what that really meant. For the first few nights, it was exactly what I needed. I woke up with the sun, spent my days hiking, reading, just existing. But on the second night when I stepped outside to take a piss, the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful, it was absolute. Predators, I told myself. Something big had to be moving through the area. But by the fifth morning, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. The landscape felt different, like someone had moved things just enough to be unsettling. Bushes disturbed, the dirt churned up, deep scratches in the trees. I ran my fingers over one of the gouges. Something was out here, something big, and it was getting closer. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe a bear, maybe just my imagination playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. By the 12th day, I was feeling more at home in the cabin. I had settled into a routine. Wake up at sunrise, hike through the woods, read for a while, cook what little food I had, and sleep early. The silence still unnerved me, but I had learned to live with it. That night, I decided to treat myself. I still had a good supply of dried goods, so I made a big pot of stew outside over the fire pit. I had read somewhere that scent blockers help keep animals away, so I wrapped the pot in a heavy tarp before heading to bed. When I woke up the next morning, the yard was destroyed. The fire pit was overturned, the dirt was torn up in massive swaths, and the bushes along the tree line were flattened, like something enormous had raged through them. My first thought was a bear, but then I saw the pot. It hadn't just been knocked over or licked clean like an animal would do. It had been shattered, split into jagged pieces scattered across the yard. The stew was smeared into the dirt, flung in all directions, as if something had deliberately thrown it around. I stared at the mess for a long time, gripping the railing of the porch. Whatever had done this hadn't been looking for food, it had been angry. A bear would have eaten, a raccoon would have at least picked through it. This felt like a tantrum. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to clean up the mess. I buried the ruined food deep in the woods, scrubbed the yard as best I could, and spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself it was nothing. But that night, the noises started. It began with a single heavy footstep outside, then another, then another. I lay completely still in my bed, ears straining. The footsteps weren't erratic, not the frantic scurrying of a scavenger. They were steady, deliberate. Whatever it was walking in circles around my cabin. My pulse pounded in my ears as I listened. After what felt like hours, the steps stopped. I told myself it was over. Then the porch creaked. Something was standing right outside my door. A slow, dragging inhale filled the silence. It was breathing. I clenched my teeth, gripping the blanket so hard my fingers ached. Then just as suddenly as it had come, the weight pulled away. The footsteps receded into the woods. But I knew it wasn't really gone. It was waiting. The next morning, I found the tracks. They were massive, easily twice the size of my own boot prints. At first, I thought they were hoof prints, maybe from a deer or elk, but they were wrong. The spacing, the weight distribution, they weren't from a four-legged animal. Whatever had left them had been walking upright. I swallowed, tracing my fingers along the deep impressions in the dirt. No, that didn't make sense. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led from the tree line straight to the porch. And then they stopped, like whatever made them had just disappeared. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I killed the fire early, doused myself in scent blocker, and sat in the darkness, knife in hand, waiting. At exactly 1:43 a.m., I heard it again, the rhythmic crunch of footsteps in the dirt. Closer, closer. Then the porch groaned under an impossible weight. Something was standing just outside, a slow inhale. I could feel the pressure in the air, like the entire cabin was shrinking around me. I had planned to peek through the window, maybe even step outside and see what it was. But now, in the moment, I wasn't so sure. Whatever was out there wasn't a bear, wasn't a deer, wasn't anything that belonged in these woods. It was massive, and it was searching for me. I stayed completely still, gripping the knife so hard my hands shook. Then just as before it left, but I knew. It was just waiting for the right moment. I should have left, grabbed my pack, walked until sunrise, never looked back. But I was too afraid of getting lost. So I made a plan. I wouldn't try to fight it. I wouldn't try to see it. I would just hide. The following night, I did everything I could to erase myself. I doused myself in scent blocker, rubbing it deep into my skin, my clothes, my hair. I piled furniture in front of the bedroom door. Then, gripping the only weapon I had, a rusted hunting knife I had found in the cabin, I squeezed into the wardrobe and pulled the door shut. I sat in the dark, knees to my chest, breath slow and controlled. And I waited. This time, it didn't make me wait long. At midnight, it let out a sound. A horrible, wet, choking laugh like a hyena gasping for air. Then a loud bang. The door downstairs exploded inward. The whole cabin shook from the impact. Heavy footsteps, wood splintering, furniture shattering. The thing wasn't searching cautiously anymore. It was tearing through the cabin, breaking things apart as it moved. A deep sniffing sound filled the air, dragging inhales like a dog trying to catch a scent. I pressed myself deeper into the closet, tightening my grip on the knife. Then, from just outside the bedroom, a heavy creak. It was at the door. I held my breath, trying to disappear into the darkness. I wanted to close my eyes, to pretend I wasn't there, but some terrible part of me needed to see. Slowly, carefully, I shifted just enough to peer through the slats of the wardrobe door. And that's when I saw it. It had to duck under the door frame as it stepped inside, easily 8 feet tall. Its body a grotesque mixture of animals, as if something had stitched it together from several different corpses. Its arms too long, its fingers disturbingly human, with 2 sets of knuckles that twisted and cracked. Its chest was bare, pale scarred skin stretched too tight. A pair of antlers curled from its skull, but they weren't symmetrical. One was twisted, bent at a wrong angle, jutting out unnaturally. Its mouth was wide, gaping too far, filled with teeth that didn't seem to fit together. But the worst part, it had no eyes, just patches of dark, sunken skin where they should have been. And yet, somehow it still knew I was there. It sniffed the air, turning its massive head in slow, jerking movements. Its breathing deep, uneven. It knew something was here. And it was angry. It took another step forward, shifting its weight onto the wooden floorboards. I held my breath. The scent blocker was working, but I didn't know if it would be enough. Then it lunged. It didn't lunge toward me. It lunged toward everything else. It roared, slamming its fist into the walls, sending splinters flying. The bed was torn apart in an instant. The dresser overturned like it weighed nothing. It moved with terrifying speed, thrashing wildly, a force of pure rage and frustration. I gritted my teeth, trying not to flinch as it ripped through the room. Then its hands landed on the wardrobe. The whole thing shook violently. I pressed myself back, my body sinking into the rough wooden panels, clutching the knife so hard my fingers ached. It sniffed again, a deep, slow inhale. I could feel its breath, hot and rancid, seeping through the cracks in the wardrobe door. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it could hear me. Then, it shoved. The entire wardrobe tipped over, crashing to the ground. I tumbled out, tangled in broken wood and fabric, my knife slipping from my grip. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my hands scrambling against the wooden floorboards. For a single agonizing moment, I thought this was it. Then, it stopped. It stood over me, hulking and massive, its body heaving with each breath. But it didn't strike. It sniffed the air again, its head tilting in jerky, unnatural motions. And then, it turned and left, just like that. It let out a deep, guttural sound, almost like a growl of frustration, then stalked toward the shattered doorway. I lay there frozen, staring up at the ceiling, my whole body trembling. I didn't move until I heard the last heavy footstep fade into the woods. Then, slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up, my hands slipping on the splintered floor. Somehow, I had survived. But I knew deep down, this thing, whatever it was, wasn't finished with me. And I couldn't stay here. I left before the sun had fully risen. I didn't pack, didn't think. I just grabbed what I could, my backpack, a flashlight, the knife, a bottle of water, and ran. The forest was dense, the trails winding and unfamiliar, but I didn't care. I had to get out. My only hope was to retrace my steps, follow the same path Jake had led me down almost 2 weeks ago. But the deeper I went, the more uncertain I became. The trees felt closer together, the light filtering through the canopy dimmer than before. Everything looked different. I tried to focus. The rock formation, I passed that on the way in, right? That fallen tree, had it been on my left or my right? Doubt crept into my mind like rust. Then the silence returned. That oppressive, unnatural silence. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of my own footsteps, the ragged pull of my breath. And behind me, just at the edge of my hearing, that awful rhythmic crunch of something moving through the underbrush. It was following me, not hunting me, toying with me. I walked faster, then jogged, then ran. Branches whipped against my arms, roots snatched at my boots. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. But no matter how fast I moved, the feeling never left. I wasn't alone. Madam, I don't know how long I ran before I saw it. A break in the trees. Houses. I stumbled forward, my legs burning, my lungs on fire. A small village, old buildings, wooden storefronts, houses tucked between them. It wasn't modern. Not a row of mailboxes and paved streets. It felt old, like it had been sitting here untouched for decades. I didn't care how strange it was. I didn't care that I had never seen it on a map. It was civilization. I had made it. I was safe. Relief hit me so hard I nearly collapsed. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than terror. I turned. I shouldn't have. I should have kept walking. Should have run straight into that village, screaming for help. But I turned, and I saw it, standing just beyond the tree line, motionless. The last light of the sun stretched long across the dirt road, painting the sky in gold and deep violet. And just as the final sliver of daylight dipped below the mountains, it moved, slowly. It crouched down like it was getting ready to run. My stomach lurched. The first building I reached looked like an old general store. The wooden sign above the door had long since faded, the windows dusty. I shoved through the door, nearly collapsing inside. A bell above jingled softly. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. Dim lantern light flickered from the walls. There were people inside. A few men in old work jackets. A woman behind the counter. A boy sitting on a stool near the wood stove. They all turned at the same time. Their expressions were blank. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Just curious. I gasped, trying to catch my breath. My throat felt raw, my lungs burning. I must have looked insane, covered in sweat and dirt, shaking like I had just crawled out of a grave. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I need help, I managed, gripping the doorframe. Something's out there, in the woods. Silence. No one said, "What are you talking about?" No one said, "Slow down, son." No one said, "That sounds crazy." Just silence. Then after a long pause, the woman behind the counter stepped forward. She didn't even ask what I had seen. She just looked me dead in the eye. And carefully, calmly, she asked, "Did it follow you?" I felt my stomach drop at her words. Did it follow me? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I turned my head slightly, glancing back through the dusty window, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The trees at the edge of the village stood still in the fading light, shadows stretching long across the dirt road. Nothing. But that didn't mean it wasn't there. I turned back to the woman behind the counter. Her expression remained neutral, but something about the way she looked at me, steady, unblinking, told me she already knew the answer. My voice cracked. I licked my lips, trying again. I don't know. The boy near the wood stove shifted on his stool. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, but his face was solemn, his hands curled around a carved wooden figure. One of the men in the room, an older guy with graying hair and deep-set wrinkles, exhaled through his nose. "Well," he muttered, "that's a damn shame." A sharp, cold fear ran down my spine. What the hell is going on?" My voice rose, frantic now. "What was that thing? Do you know?" The woman behind the counter, still calm, still watching me carefully, took a deep breath. "It's been here before." The words sent ice through my veins. "Been here before?" I repeated. She nodded. "Long before you ever came to that cabin." My hands curled into fists at my sides. My body ached from exhaustion, my mind reeling. I don't understand. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why did they let me go up there?" The woman, Martha, I noticed the name stitched onto her faded apron, sighed. "Would you have listened?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because she was right. I wouldn't have. I would have thought it was some stupid local legend, some backwoods superstition. And now it was too late. Martha glanced toward the window, then back at me. "You need to come inside." I am inside." Her gaze darkened. "All the way inside, now." A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't question her. I took slow steps forward, crossing the threshold fully. Behind me, the old man moved toward the door, pulling it shut and sliding a heavy wooden bolt into place. "Keep the lights low," he muttered. "Don't make any noise." The air in the store felt heavy, suffocating. I turned back to Martha, my pulse pounding. "Tell me what's going on." She studied me for a long moment, then finally spoke. "We call it the Hollow One." My skin prickled. "The Hollow One?" I whispered. Martha nodded. "It doesn't see the way we do. It doesn't hear like we do. But it knows. It knows when something doesn't belong." A sick feeling twisted in my gut. It followed me. I know it did. Sammy, the boy near the stove, lifted his head. "If it's followed you this far, it won't stop now." My breath hitched. The older man grunted, settling himself into a chair near the door. "Damn fool," he muttered. "I didn't know," I said hoarsely. "You should have." Martha shot him a sharp look before turning back to me. "Listen," she said quietly. "It hasn't crossed into the village yet. Not fully. That means we still have time." "Time for what?" My voice shook. Martha hesitated. "Time to make it forget about you." A chill ran down my spine. "Forget?" I echoed. Sammy nodded. "It doesn't just hunt. It erases." My chest tightened. "Erases?" "It takes people," Martha said. "And when it does, it's like they were never here at all." My head spun. But I made it out," I stammered. "I got away." Martha's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "You think you got away?" I didn't like the way she said that. A long silence stretched between us. Outside, the last sliver of daylight disappeared. Then, a single slow creak echoed from the porch. Something had stepped onto the wooden boards outside. Everyone in the room went still. My breath caught in my throat. Another step, closer. Then, it stopped. The silence was suffocating. My pulse pounded so hard I thought it might shake the walls. Sammy shifted on his stool, his fingers tightening around the wooden figure in his hands. Martha didn't move, didn't blink. Then from outside, a slow, dragging inhale. I squeezed my eyes shut. The old man exhaled sharply through his nose. "Stupid kid," he muttered. My hands trembled. Outside, something shifted. Then, in a voice that didn't belong to anyone in this room, a voice that sounded like mine, it spoke. "Let me in." My blood turned to ice. It wasn't possible. It was my voice. Exactly my voice. The inflection, the rasp of exhaustion, even the slight tremor of fear, perfectly replicated. But I hadn't said a word. Sammy flinched, his small fingers digging into the wooden carving in his hands. Martha remained still, her face unreadable, but I could see the tension in her jaw. The old man, sitting near the door, let out a slow breath. "Don't answer," he said quietly, as if I needed the warning. The thing outside shifted. I could hear the wood groaning under its weight, the slow, deliberate way it moved. Then again, "Let me in." My stomach churned. It was wrong. The way it spoke was wrong. The words were clear, too clear, like they had been pulled apart and carefully reconstructed, piece by piece. I felt dizzy. Martha finally moved. She stepped toward the lantern on the counter and turned the flame down low until the store was cast in near darkness. "It's testing you," she murmured. I swallowed, my throat dry. "What does it want?" I whispered. "Acknowledgement." I shuddered. The thing outside let out a sound, a slow, guttural laugh, low and wet, like something trying to mimic human amusement but failing. "I know you're in there," it said, still in my voice. The old man tensed, his hands curling into fists on his lap. Sammy let out a quiet breath and moved closer to Martha. I couldn't take it. I turned, peering through the smallest sliver of the dusty window. My breath caught in my throat. The street outside was bathed in shadow, the trees looming like silent sentinels. But at the very edge of the lantern light, there it was, standing deathly still in the center of the road, facing the store. Its frame was massive, shoulders too broad, limbs too long. But its head was mine. I choked back a noise, stumbling away from the window. My head, my face, but wrong. The shape was too smooth, the skin stretched too tightly over its skull, like a mask molded in wax. Its mouth curled into an approximation of a smile. It took a single step forward. "You don't belong here," it said. But the words weren't mine anymore. The voice shifted, distorted, layered, as if it were pulling from different sources, different people. Martha grabbed my wrist, her grip iron. "Don't look at it again," she whispered. I could barely nod. "What?" I couldn't get my voice steady. "What do we do?" Martha hesitated. Then softly she said, "We wait." The hours crawled by. No one moved. No one spoke. The thing outside didn't knock, didn't push. It just waited. Every so often, it would shift its weight, the porch creaking under its impossible size. Sometimes it would breathe, slow, deep inhales, dragging air into lungs it shouldn't have. But mostly it was silent, watching. Somewhere past midnight, I whispered, "Why doesn't it just come in?" Martha exhaled through her nose. "Because it follows rules," she said. "Rules?" I echoed. "It wants to be let in." I shuddered. The old man, still sitting by the door, finally spoke again. "It's been here before," he muttered. "Every few years it finds someone new, someone who wandered too far into its woods, someone who doesn't belong." I licked my lips. "What happens if it gets in?" No one answered me. I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter. My head ached, exhaustion dragging at me. "So how do I get rid of it?" I whispered. Sammy, still clutching the wooden carving, finally looked at me. "You don't," he said. A cold weight settled in my chest. "Then what do I do?" Martha sighed. "You make it forget you." I don't remember falling asleep, but at some point I woke up to silence. A different kind of silence. A silence that felt empty. Martha was still standing near the counter, arms crossed. The old man had dozed off in his chair, his chest rising and falling steadily. Sammy was staring at the door. I sat up, my muscles aching. "It's gone," I murmured. Sammy didn't look away. "No," he said softly, "it's waiting." I swallowed thickly. Martha finally turned to me. Ashar turned to me, her expression grim. "You can't stay here," she said. "Not forever, but you can't leave yet either." "So what do I do?" My voice was raw. Martha hesitated. "There's a way," she said, "to make it forget you." The old man stirred. "It's not a good way," he muttered, rubbing a hand down his face. My stomach twisted, but I didn't have a choice. "Tell me." Martha sighed, running a hand through her graying hair. "You have to forget it first." My breath hitched. "What?" She nodded. "It only lingers if you remember, if you hold on to it, if you keep thinking about it, fearing it, acknowledging it. That's how it stays. That's how it hunts." I stared at her. "So you're saying you have to let it go," she said, completely. "But," I swallowed, shaking my head. "How do I do that? It followed me. It copied me. It tore my cabin apart. How am I just supposed to forget?" Martha exhaled through her nose. "It's hard," she admitted, "but it's the only way." I leaned back against the counter, my pulse hammering. "What if I can't?" Sammy, still staring at the door, finally whispered, "Then it never will." I stayed in the village for 3 days. The first night, I still heard it outside, but by the second, the silence began to settle. By the third, I woke up feeling lighter. I couldn't remember the exact shape of its face anymore. The details were slipping, how tall it had been, how its fingers had moved. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. When I woke up, Martha was already at the counter, pouring coffee. "You should go," she said simply. I hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's forgotten you," she said. "You should do the same." I swallowed, my mouth dry. "And if I don't?" Martha held my gaze. "Then one night, years from now, you'll hear footsteps outside your door." A shudder ran through me. I left that afternoon. I never went back to the cabin. I never told anyone what happened. I never spoke about it again. And eventually, I forgot. But some nights, when the woods outside are quiet, too quiet, I wonder, did I really forget? Or is it just waiting for me to remember? When I think back on everything that happened, I realize this wasn't just a story about fear. It was about something deeper. About what happens when we go looking for isolation and find something else instead. I thought I wanted silence. Thought I needed to be alone. But maybe that's what it was waiting for. Maybe it watches for people like me. People who disappear into the woods. People no one will miss right away. People who convince themselves they can handle the loneliness. Maybe that's why it let me go. Because it knew deep down, a part of me would always be listening for it. And maybe, just maybe, one day I'll remember too much. And when I do, it'll be waiting. But that's just my story. What do you think? What do you make of this? Do you think I really escaped? Or do you think I was just another piece in its game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you would have done if you had been in my shoes. And if you enjoyed this story, if it kept you on edge, made you think, or just sent a chill down your spine, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who loves horror, someone who might just lose themselves in the quiet of the woods, someone who, just like me, might think they'd rather be alone. But remember, Some things are always listening, even when you try to forget them.